this so close? I think it needs to be a bit like that. Hi guys, sorry I'm a bit late. This is going to be a really interesting episode, I think, given the subject matter. It's Van Gogh talking about his luckless, unfortunate visit to Key Vos, his flame kind of at the time. We're going to be looking at a letter dated 21 December 1881, right? I just want to bring up chat so I can see what you guys are saying. I'm glad to see a couple of you have voted. Was Vincent van Gogh wrong to pursue Key? 61% say yes, 39% say no, so it's kind of like 60-40. But I think we'll talk about that a little bit in more detail in due course, talk about that from different perspectives. I think one perspective is in the timeline. So in other words, if you didn't know Van Gogh was going to become who he was going to become, and then also with the benefit of hindsight, and then also another perspective. So anyway, I just want to say hi to the mods, Sharon, Nisi. I don't see Stephanie yet. I don't know if we're going to see her, but also good to see some of the other folks, the members, Paddy, Margaret Zabinski, Amy Hall, Robbie Robin, Yvonne Phillips. Happy Wednesday, everybody. So good to see you here. Okay, so I'm not going to beat around the bush. I think let's get going. So this is the letter if you guys want to follow. I don't know if you guys remember, we got sort of halfway through the letter and then I was sort of horrified by how much more was to come. But in a way, it's actually a great way to kick off this particular episode. So this is where he really talks about his visit to Amsterdam. And this is how he kind of builds up to it. Oh, is Cotton Star here? Cotton Star, Justin Ross Harris conviction overturned. Interesting. I don't know if you guys know, the Petitos are also in court today. I think they were in court. If you guys aren't sure about Justin Ross Harris, he's the, well, let me just put a link in the description. The laundries didn't actually pitch up for that hearing. Okay, so also just while we haven't started, I'll be doing another live stream tomorrow on Amber Heard. Quite a few things have been coming out. She's apparently writing a book. Is that advisable? Do you think her lawyers are advising her to do that? Is she going to be getting legal advice in writing it? I also want to talk to you about another trial. Danielle, is it Redlick? She's almost, it's almost like a inversion of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, and it's someone who went on trial, and then I just want to compare Amber Heard to Danielle, and then also the outcomes of both these cases. Quite an interesting conversation. So the idea is to do a Culture's Wrath tomorrow, and then the day after Danielle Redlick, and then just sort of juxtapose those. I do want to take you guys to the affidavit just to be quite detailed in what we're talking about. So look out for that. Sharon Tuck says that's an interesting case here. I think it's particularly interesting if you juxtapose it with Depp versus Heard, and also compare the believability of Danielle to the lack of credibility of Amber, and then say, does that make sense? And yeah, so we're going to look at that. Nisi says, watch that trial, not the outcome I imagined. Okay, so let's get started with this letter. So he writes sort of probably about a quarter of the way through. He says, and when I read, and actually I don't read all that much, and then only a few writers, men whom I've discovered by accident, then I do so because they look at things more broadly and generously and with more love than I do, and are acquainted better with reality, and because I can learn from them. So I think that's quite a good point he's making, where he says he's sort of acknowledging that other men, other people are better acquainted with reality. He's sort of realized that he's actually quite naive in matters of life, work, love, art, etc. And then he also says, but I really don't care for all that twaddle about good and evil, morality and immorality. Now you must think about that statement in the context of him living at home with his parents. And of course, his father's a pastor. So what do you think his father would think of him saying, I don't care for all the twaddle about good and evil, morality and immorality? Then he says, for to be sure, I find it impossible always to tell what is good and what is bad, what is moral and what is immoral. And then he says in the next paragraph, morality or immorality brings me back willy-nilly to KV. So he doesn't even write a name, but KV stands for Kivos. Then he writes, exclamation mark. I wrote to you at the time that it was beginning to seem less and less like eating strawberries in the spring. Well, that is indeed the case. So I don't know, it's kind of quite tongue-in-cheek. It's in a way, quite a funny way that he talks about this affair. He compares the process and I guess the lack of progress to the possibility of eating strawberries in the spring. And it's quite a fleshy, the symbolism is quite sort of intimate if you think about it. I suppose you can read a lot into it and you can read not a lot into it, but the bottom line is, I guess, that he's not particularly hopeful, is not particularly positive about a good outcome. Anyway, he goes on to say, forgive me if I repeat myself, but I don't know if I've already written to you exactly what happened to me in Amsterdam. I went there thinking perhaps the no, never, ever will thaw. The weather is so mild. So I don't know whether he was thinking the weather might have an impact on the no, never, ever. So that's another sort of way he refers to this symbolically. The other thing that I think is quite interesting with this is, although he mentioned in passing to Theo that he'd been there, it was quite a short letter. And so you get a sense that when something dramatic happens to Vincent, he doesn't necessarily deal with it at the time. He sort of ruminates on it and maybe allows a certain amount of time for the emotions to process. And I think that is probably something worth bearing in mind in terms of his last days in Norvège. If something was going on with him, would he necessarily communicate it? There were a lot of things he would communicate. And I think one of those would be if he's painting Dr. Gachet, that's a big deal to him. But I think there are other things that he would sometimes either hold onto for a while or keep his cards close to his chest in a general way. Anyway, he goes on to say, by the way, just one more point. I think one good way to illustrate the two sides to Van Gogh, in a way, is in 1888 when he writes letters to GOGH and he writes letters to his brother. He's a little bit more familiar with GOGH. He's a little bit more worldly and sort of lascivious. He's kind of, anyway, it's almost like if you just think about it in general terms, what do you share with a sibling compared to what do you share with like a best friend? What is the level of sharing? And for some of you, it might be the opposite. You might say, I would share more with a sibling. But I think, I don't know if it's typical that where that's the case. Often you can share a lot more intimate details and a lot more, in a way you can be more yourself with a friend than with a family member. Bearing in mind that a family member may communicate something that is private and personal to another family member. Okay, so let's go on with the letter. So he says, and so one fine evening I trudged along the Keisergracht looking for the house, and indeed I found it, meaning looking for Key's house. And naturally I rang the doorbell and was told the family was still at dinner. So he rings the doorbell, sorry, everyone's still eating. But then I was told to come in all the same. And all of them were there, including Jan and that very learned professor, except for Key. So everyone's at dinner, but Key's not there. And there was a plate in front of each person, but no extra plate. This small detail struck me. They had wanted to make me think that Key wasn't there and had taken away a plate. But I knew that she was there, and I thought it all a bit of a farce or charade, right? So that's quite an interesting. So here you almost have Vincent playing the detective. I know she's inside, I know she's there, kind of thing. Nisi says, I share more with my sister, unusual because of trouble it could get me in. Should probably stay out of family lanes. Okay, so then he goes on to say, after a while I asked, after the usual small talk and greetings, but where is Key? So, I mean, that's the reason he's there. He's arrived at the house to visit Key, and she's strangely absent, and no one's mentioning it. Then, and he just refers to him as JPS, but I think it is it Jan and something Stricker, so that's Key's father. Then JPS repeated my question to his wife, Mother, where is Key? And Mother, the wife said, Key is out. So I don't know what you guys think about that. Do you think that the father really didn't know where Key was? Do you think that it was something that was like a ploy, or was it exactly what it was? Vincent arrived there, and Key, who's probably in her late 20s, if not early 30s, is just somewhere else. The whole family's having dinner, but Key just happens to not be there. Anyway, so he says, so for the moment I inquired no further, but chatted with the professor about the exhibition at Artie, which he had just seen. Well, then the professor disappeared, and little Jan disappeared, and JPS, that's a reference to her father, and his spouse and yours truly remained alone and squared up to each other. JPS took the floor, in other words, Key's father, as clergyman and father, and said that he had been on the point of sending yours truly, meaning Vincent, a letter that he would read that letter out. First, however, interrupting the reverend or very reverend gentleman, I asked again, where is Key? For I knew she was in town. So, yeah, you've got this young man, 28 years old, kind of confronting his uncle, saying, where is Key? I need to see her. And then JPS said, Key left the house the moment she heard you were here. There you have it. So that's kind of calling a spade, telling it like it is. And it's also not quite accurate what was said earlier, that Key is out. So it does turn out that Key left the moment he kind of knocked on the door. Someone probably saw who it was, told her, then she left out of a back door, and then they put a plate away. And then everyone kind of pretended that they didn't know where she was, kind of thing, right? Yeah, Susan says, I wonder if it was Key's idea. Then he goes on to say, now I know a few things about her, and I must make clear to you that I did not know then, nor do I know now with any certainty whether her coldness and rudeness are a good or a bad sign. This much I do know, that I've never seen her so apparently or actually cold and stern and rude to anyone else but me. So, staying perfectly calm, I did not say much. Let me hear the letter then, I said, or not. I don't much care either way. So Vincent's been quite rude to his uncle, but I guess you could argue that someone's been quite rude to him, that they're playing kind of a game and he doesn't really appreciate it. And so it looks like at this point, it looks like the Reverend had prepared a letter and now he's just going to read the letter to him, but in person. And then he says, then came the epistle. The document was very reverend and most learned, and so did not really amount to anything. But it did seem to say that I was requested to seize my correspondence and advised to make energetic efforts to put the matter out of my mind. Finally, the reading came to an end. So he's comparing this letter almost to a sermon. He says, I felt just as if I'd been listening to the clergyman after his voice had been doing a sing-song, saying Amen in church. It left me as cold as any ordinary sermon. It's quite interesting what he says there. It shows that he's had a complete change of heart in terms of his religious fervor, if that's the right way to refer to it. If you think about it, he was initially very caught up in the Bible, in the church, and so on. And now his feelings about that same subject matter is totally different, given this the deception, the control, the contrivance around preventing him from seeing someone that he wants to see. He kind of sees it as being dishonest. And it kind of has a point. It kind of has a point, I guess. So Robbie Robbins says, did they have warning that Vincent was on the way? I doubt it, because I think if they did have a warning, he wouldn't have been there whatsoever. She wouldn't even have been there having dinner. I don't think he phoned. Well, they didn't really have phones. I don't think he wrote a letter to say, expect me there at 8 p.m. So I don't think there was a warning. Yvonne says, that sounds pretty honest. Okay. So he goes on to say, and then I began and said as calmly and civilly as I could, well, yes, I had heard this kind of argument very often before, but what now? And then he uses a French expression, et après ça, which I think means and after that. And then JPS, and he asks that rhetorically, he says, JPS looked up and then indeed he seemed fairly alarmed that I was not completely convinced that the utmost limit of the human capacity to think and feel had been reached. According to him, no, and after that was possible any longer. I'm not quite sure what he's saying here. He's saying, according to him, no et après ça was possible any longer. I'm not quite sure what that means. Then he goes on to say, and so we continued, and every so often Aunt M would add a peculiarly Jesuitical word, and I got a bit steamed up, and for once I did not pull my punches. So he's saying that he got angry and that he wasn't all that civil, put it that way. Yvonne says he's hurt by the hypocrisy of the so-called Christian behavior. Paddy says Vincent van Gogh counted on the element of surprise. Yeah, I think he should have, if he'd known better, he would have gone to the front door, knocked, and then run round to the back door, or something like that. Anyway, he says, and JPS, another reference to her father, did not pull his punches either, going as far as clergymen could. And although he did not exactly say, God damn you, anyone other than a clergyman in JPS's mood would have expressed himself thus. But you know that I love both father and JPS in my way, despite really detesting their system. And I shifted my ground a bit and gave and took a little. And that at the end of the evening, they told me I could stay for the night if I wished. So it's quite interesting. They have this pretty unpleasant argument. They have this pretty what's the word, aggressive confrontation, where Key's father's not pulling his punches, Van Gogh's not pulling his punches, but somewhere he says the ground shifts and he gives in a little, and then they actually invite him to stay for the night. And this is Van Gogh's response. Now, bear in mind, they're saying, you can spend the night here in our home. And then it kind of, well, where's Key Vos going to be? Is she coming home? Where's she? Then I said, thank you very much, but if Key walks out of the house as soon as I come calling, I don't think this is the right moment to spend the night here. I'll go to my lodgings. And that's the title that I used for this live stream. Him saying, well, if Key walks out the house the moment I come calling, I don't think it's the right moment to spend the night here. And then they asked, where are you staying? And so obviously you can see what's going on is they want to know his whereabouts. They want to know where he is because they're trying to keep the two apart. Then he said, I don't know yet. And then uncle and aunt insisted on taking me themselves to a good cheap hotel. And my goodness, those two old people went with me through the cold, foggy, muddy streets, and they did indeed show me a very good and very cheap hotel. I absolutely insisted on their not coming, and they absolutely insisted on showing me. And you see, I found something very human in that, and it calmed me down a bit. I stayed in Amsterdam another 2 days and had another talk with JPS, but I didn't see Key, who spirited herself away every time. And I said that they ought to know that though they wanted me to consider the matter over and done with, I, for my part, was unable to do so. And so that, and to that, they continually and steadily replied that I would learn to understand things better in time, which seems a bit condescending in a way, but anyway, he says, I saw the professor too again a few times, and I have to say he improves upon acquaintance, but what else can I say about the gentleman? I told him I wished he might fall in love one day. There you are. Can professors fall in love? Do clergymen know what love is? I read Michelet's La Femme, la Religion et la Prêtre the other day. The correct title is Du Prêtre, de la Femme, de la Famille. Books like that are filled with reality, but what is more real than reality itself? And where is there more life than in life itself? And we who are doing our best to live, if only we lived a great deal more, exclamation mark. So what he's saying there is that he's actually kind of experiencing his real self and the real world through this attempt to love somebody, and he's being obviously restricted, limited, outplayed, outfoxed, whatever kind of thing. But nevertheless, it's in his pursuit of someone that means a lot to him that he's actually feeling like he's experiencing reality. And then he reads books that he feels are filled with reality. Yeah, so it's quite interesting. You know, what is interesting is discovering that he is quite naive, that he's got a lot to learn kind of thing. But he's also he's sort of starting to stand up for himself. He's saying, do clergymen know what love is? And I think it's quite a good question. And he's obviously talking about a certain kind of love, like the eros kind of love, I guess. Then he says, time hung heavily on my hands on those 3 days in Amsterdam. I felt thoroughly miserable and found all that grudging kindness of uncles and aunts and all those discussions very hard to take, until in the end I began to find myself hard to take as well, and said to myself, you don't want to get melancholy again, do you? And then I said to myself, don't let yourself be browbeaten. So, you know, it's quite sad. He goes there, obviously at quite great expense. He's been begging his brother for money. He goes there. Yvonne says, I also think those books have a lot to do with him turning away from his faith. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a point where during his religious fervor phase, he kind of says, stop reading Michelet, right? now he's gone kind of back to it. I think it's quite tragic that he goes to so much effort to see Kivos and ultimately doesn't see her at all. I mean, I think it is pretty disappointing. If I can share something out of my backstory, where I remember being in a kind of agony, I'd arranged like a mountain bike race on my dad's farm, and my sister told me about a friend of hers who I kind of wanted to have that whole thing like in the Tour de France where the winner of the race, gets handed the prize by kind of a pretty girl, like the podium girls. And so I kind of wanted this event to have that sort of aspect to it. And then I think I mentioned it, and my sister said, why don't you ask a certain person? And then I did. And then I met her, and we really got along incredibly well. And I still remember I went there sort of in the early afternoon, and I left, not late at night, but I left quite long after dark, or quite late, not late in the evening, but it certainly was, I was there long enough for the sun to go down and for it to be pitch dark when I left, kind of thing. And we got along really well, and things kind of developed between us, and I kind of fell head over heels. And then the next thing, I think I had to go and do a triathlon somewhere, and then she left the town we were living in permanently, and she moved to Cape Town. And then she'd signed up to a modeling, a modeling agency. And then I can't quite remember how it happened, but the whole idea was that I was going to see her again in Cape Town, and then she just stopped communicating with me. It was just like that. So we had this incredible beginning, and then nothing. And then I just thought, well, is she busy, whatever? And days turned into more days, and eventually it was a week that went by. And then incredibly one day I bumped into her on the beach. And then, but I mean, I at least did see her, and that was quite a good way of like, okay, so that's it, kind of thing. Vincent didn't even have that experience. So the problem with when you don't see someone, you have all these conversations in your mind, right? You have all of these conversations in your mind, and kind of in your heart. And if you can just speak to someone, even if their feelings have changed, that's at least reality. Otherwise, you're kind of just talking to yourself. And I think I kind of snapped awake when I bumped into her on the beach. It was like, wow, so you have the perfect freedom to do whatever, and you've just decided not to communicate with me. And anyway, I just remember that as being, I remember those days that went by, one full day, another full day, another full day. And so that's my experience, or something similar to that. A funny postscript to that story was she went on to become quite a big model, I guess, and I think it turned out, anyway, let me not talk about that. And then many years later, it was probably 10 or 20 years later, I was walking in the mall with another girlfriend at the time, and I actually saw her, and she was like totally transformed. I think she'd cut her hair. Anyway, she just looked, you couldn't believe that she'd been a model once upon a time. So I recognized her, but she just looked kind of frumpy. And I sort of felt, and I was with a really this particular woman that I was with meant a lot to me, and we had quite a lovely time together. And I kind of felt quite a nice sense of I was now with her. Don't want to say her name, but she was. I thought, wow, you're a lot more beautiful than this other person is now, and it just made that horrible period that I'd gone through just kind of feel less horrible. And the problem is when you're 20 something, those relationships can feel like the end of the world, and it's quite hard to sort of think life goes on and there are sort of many fish in the sea. Sometimes when you're a very serious person, which Van Gogh was, you can sort of feel like you and no other, which is exactly kind of how he felt. And I think that sort of brings us to the poll, where the poll is, was Vincent van Gogh wrong to pursue Key? And I think just that 60-40 answer from you guys, that's kind of the answer, is that he was wrong because she wasn't interested in him, but he was also right to at least try and pursue. In other words, to try and, it's better that he tried to love someone that didn't try at all. But then the next test was, you've failed in this pursuit. You've lost, fair lady. Are you going to have the strength to pick yourself up and try again? Are you going to be able to, recover from the setback and push out and, you know what I mean? Are you going to try again? And that's the part that I find quite unfortunate, is after Kivos, it seems like he kind of gives up in a practical way. And one wonders if he was allowed to talk to her and she was allowed to talk to him, where he's at least honored as a person. Bear in mind, Van Gogh would go on to become this incredible artist, one of the most beloved artists in the world. If they'd known that, if she'd known that, maybe they would have had a different attitude to say, you know what, he deserves an answer. He deserves, even if the answer is no, he deserves to be told something. Now, obviously, you can understand them feeling that he's very persistent, he's very stubborn, he doesn't want to give up. But the other side to that is he's a human being and he can be reasoned with. You can see in his letters that he can be reasoned with. And so maybe he needed someone to reason with him, right? The flip side to that whole conversation is all of this was taking Van Gogh where he needed to go. So he was a tortured artist, he was a troubled artist, and so if his relationship with Kivos, whether it was the breakup or the actual relationship, ended happily ever after, if she'd given him a big hug and said, you know what, you're awesome, but I can't date a guy with gonorrhea, or kind of thing, or whatever it is. If it had ended happily ever after, would he have been so dedicated to his art? Because it seems like he ultimately turned his back in a sense on all women, and his mistress or his partner, his spouse, kind of became art, if that makes sense. So if there was a bit more pleasantness in terms of his engagements and pursuits with the opposite sex, maybe he would have not been so passionate about his art. Does that make sense? Sky says, you don't look old in your picture, Sharon, you look young and lovely. Ricardo says, hi. Something about one of his letters, he mentioned he had learned from the experience. That's why I voted no. He was not wrong. Yeah, so I think there are a couple of different ways to look at that. One way is to say, should he be pursuing her if she said no? And that to me is like the simple bottom line. She said no, and so that should be it. The other thing that I think is a factor is that she may be being controlled or influenced by her family. So she may have felt, I love my dad, I love my mom, and that might be the be-all end of it. The other side may be she actually just didn't like Vincent. She may have felt he's ugly, he smells or whatever. And one wonders what gave him the idea that she liked him. That's the part that I'd kind of be interested in. I would love to see the letters him and her wrote to one another, but where are they? Have they been edited out of the narrative, kind of thing? Sharon says it's the heart inside that matters, and she didn't have it. Robbie Robbins says, yes, at least he had confidence in himself and gave it a go. Yeah. Nisi says, agree, Nick, better to try than not try. Allows growth if you take advantage of it. So in a way, you can almost answer yes and no to the question. Was Vincent van Gogh wrong to pursue Key? No. But then you could also say beyond a certain point, maybe it was wrong. Maybe if you just think about all the energy that he spends here, if he could have just let it go and kind of redirected it to somebody else, he could have saved himself a lot of energy, a lot of pain. Of course, I know where it was coming from. He felt like he'd given up too quickly on Eugenie. That was the lesson he felt that he learned. I don't know whether he did, whether that was the right lesson, but he felt he'd given up too quickly on Eugenie. And so he felt like, I'm going to apply that lesson here. And of course, I don't know if it was the right thing, kind of thing. Paddy says Vincent was 7 years younger than Key. Yvonne says, did they know he had gonorrhea? No, I don't think so. No, I don't think so. I just was kind of making a joke. Okay, so let's continue. You can see it's quite a long letter. Then he says, so he kind of says, you know what? I don't get melancholy again, and don't be browbeaten. So he's kind of, remember where he was when he was in the Borinage? He actually had a breakdown, and he's actually going to end up in the hospital a couple of months from now. So he actually kind of realizes, wow, I think I need to back off, like I'm up against a brick wall. And then he says, and so it was that on a Sunday morning, I went to see JPS for the last time. And I said, look here, dear uncle, if Kivos were an angel, then she would be too exalted for me. And I don't think I could stay in love. I don't think I could stay in love with an angel. If she were a devil, I shouldn't want to have anything to do with her. In the present case, I see in her a real woman with feminine passions and whims, and I love her very much indeed, and that is a fact, and I'm glad of it. As long as she doesn't become an angel or a devil, then the present case is not over. So it's quite hard to argue with that, but JPS couldn't add much to that and even said something about feminine passions. Now imagine having a conversation like that about a real woman with feminine passions with the father of that woman. Anyway, he says, I don't quite know what he said, and then JPS went off to church. No wonder one grows hardened there and turns to stone, as I know from my own experience. So he's saying, actually going to church in a way hardens you to life in a way, and to living in a way, I guess that's what he's saying. Then he says, and so as far as the person in question, your brother, is concerned, he refused to allow himself to be browbeaten, but that didn't alter the fact that he had a browbeaten feeling, as if he had been standing too long against a cold, hard whitewashed church wall. It's funny enough, I've just mentioned that. If he was up against like a wall. So what I want you to again think about is, we've spoken in the past, in previous episodes, about, is Vincent van Gogh mad? And also, can he get so emotional that he kind of gets depressed? And then can that lead to him acting in a weird way? And I don't know, yeah, you have him going through some of the most profound disappointment. This had to have been really painful, and yet he's so eloquent, and there's even like a touch of humor and being a bit tongue-in-cheek. You kind of really get the sense that although he's quite naive, and although he's to some extent reckless and a little bit brazen, there's another side to him that's quite, he's kind of got stamina and endurance in an emotional sense. He's able to suffer the slings and arrows even of kind of rejection, right? Robbie Robbins says he seems more naive than mad, but I'm just saying, from the tone of his letter, it's not like he's spitting venom or blaming anyone or very triggered or very emotional. He's actually quite straightforward. And, the fact where he says, that didn't alter the fact that I had a browbeaten feeling as if I'd been standing too long against a cold, hard, whitewashed church wall. Then he says, and yes, if I may say so, my dear fellow, it is a little risky to remain a realist, but Theo, you are a realist yourself after all. Well, please put up with my realism. I told you that as far as I'm concerned, even my secrets are no secrets. Well, I'm not taking that back. Think of me what you will, and whether or not you approve of what I did does not really affect the issue. I continue. From Amsterdam, I went to Haarlem and spent a very enjoyable time with our dear little sister Wilhelmine, and went for a walk with her. And in the evening, I left for The Hague and ended up at Ems at about 7 o'clock. That's a reference to Mauve. And I said, look here, M, you were supposed to come to Eton to try to initiate me more or less into the mysteries of the palette. I think he's talking about the color palette. He says, but it occurred to me that you would take more than a few days, so I've come to you. And if you agree, I shall stay here for about 4 to 6 weeks, or for as long or as short a time as you like. And then we shall see what is to be done. It's a bit impertinent of me to ask so much of you, but, well, I don't know how to say this. Bria might know. Je l'épée dans les reins. I'm under great pressure. Not quite sure you say that in French. Je l'épée dans les reins. I'm under great pressure. I think Van Gogh kind of had a double agenda there. I think he didn't want to go home, because if he did go home, he would immediately be under the cosh from his dad. I told you to leave Kivos alone. Who said you could go to Amsterdam? I heard you were there. And he just didn't want to deal with that. So he goes to Mauve for a couple of weeks. And so by the time he returns home, it's kind of blown over, right? He just doesn't want to deal with it. Then he says, anyway, then M said, have you brought anything with you? Certainly, here are a few studies. And then he said far too many kind things about them. But he also made far too few criticisms. Can you see how the letter kind of goes, it sort of pivots from this pursuit of key, and then he's frustrated in that. And then from there, he kind of, as I say, pivots to art. And you can kind of see how it's almost like the real world, where there are women who he may like and be attracted to, but who aren't interested in him. That's the painful reality. And then there's the other reality where he can paint and he can kind of pour his attention into that and kind of back himself. He can invest himself in his own efforts. And you can argue that even if he doesn't have anything to show for it, it's almost less risky in a way. like, in other words, far more risky because, it's your whole life that ends up being a risk in a way. But what I'm getting at is that the risk of loving gets, in a way, that investment gets redirected to the risk of creating art, which in other words, that terrible fear of loving and being rejected or unrequited love gets redirected to investing in art and something that's tangible. He can put his paintbrush into the oil paints and he can mix them, and it's something tangible and real in front of him. Whereas Key, for example, is almost like this Ether. She's sort of out there. He knows she's there, but he never sees her. She's like real, but kind of fantasy. For all intents and purposes, she doesn't really exist, right? Something I've always found quite horrible is that you can love somebody, and then when that relationship ends, it's like this unspoken thing, well, we shouldn't really communicate anymore. I'm not saying it always happens like that, but sometimes it does. You love somebody, especially if you love them a lot, and then maybe they get married or whatever, but a situation kind of comes up where it's not appropriate to maintain any kind of contact. And then it's like that person might as well be dead, or you might as well be dead. So you like go from loving someone to, well, you shouldn't really ever talk to them again. It's like literally that person dying. And so you've got to live with that, but that makes it worse. It's like a living death that you've got to go through the rest of your life, kind of thing. And I kind of get the sense that he goes through that, and then he almost tries to soothe those feelings through painting in a way. In a way, it's running away from life, Anyway, so he says, and since then, I've done a few painted studies and then later 2 watercolors. So that is the summary of the work, but working with one's hands and head is not the whole of life. I still felt chilled to the marrow, that is, to the marrow of my soul, by the above-mentioned imaginary or non-imaginary church wall. And I said to myself, you don't want to let that fatal feeling browbeat you. Then I thought to myself, I should like to be with a woman for a change. I cannot live without love, without a woman. I wouldn't give 2 cents for life if there were not something infinite, something deep, something real. So now he's kind of equating the feeling of being alive and reality with the feeling of being with a woman. He sort of kind of come into a kind of awakening where he feels like being alive is being with a woman, loving her and her loving you, whatever that whole feeling is. I think you all know what I'm talking about. And so that's what he wants to have. So he says, but said I to myself then, you said she and no other, and now you want to go to another woman. But that's unreasonable, isn't it? That's illogical, isn't it? And my answer to that was, who is the master, logic or I? Does logic exist for me, or do I exist for logic? And is there no reason or sense in my unreasonableness or my lack of sense? And whether I do right or wrong, I have no choice. That damned wall is too cold for me. I need a woman. I cannot, will not, may not live without love. I am only a man, and a man with passions. I must have a woman, otherwise I shall freeze or turn to stone, or in short, I shall have let things browbeat me. I had in the circumstances, however, fought a great battle with myself, and in that battle, some of the things I believe concerning one's constitution and hygiene that I have come to know more or less through bitter experience gained the upper hand. One cannot forego a woman for too long with impunity, and I do not believe that what some call God and others the supreme being and others nature is unreasonable and pitiless. In short, I came to the conclusion, I want to see whether I can find a woman. And my goodness, I didn't have to look all that far. I found a woman, by no means young, by no means beautiful, nothing special if you like, but perhaps if you're a little curious, She was fairly tall and strongly built. She didn't have the hands of a lady like Kivas, but the hands of a woman who does a great deal of work. But she was not coarse or common and had something very feminine about her. She reminded me of some quaint figure by Chardin or Frere or perhaps Jan Steen. Anyway, what the French call une ouvrière, a woman worker, and I think that's a prostitute. She had many cares, you could see, and life had been hard for her. Oh, nothing refined, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing unusual. Then he writes in French, the translation is, any woman at any age, if she loves and is a good woman, can give a man not the infinity of a moment, but a moment of infinity. Theo, for me, that jaded je ne sais quoi, that something over which life has passed as infinite charm. Ah, for me, she did have charm, something of Feyen Perrin or Perugino. See here, I'm not quite as innocent as a bec blanc, a greenhorn, but much less a baby in a cradle. Hey Jealousy says, Vincent suffers the same rejection that is so common. Nisi says, what an incredible description. Is he talking himself into her or Theo into her? Ricardo says, Nick knows Vincent pretty well, wish he would edit a Van Gogh charade deck. Okay, so I think you can see what's going on here, that he's actually in kind of lickety split. He's kind of gone from fully committed to Kivas to finding affection elsewhere. And it's kind of sad. It's kind of, you kind of get the sense that he's kind of said, I'm not going to be depressed about this. And so he's trying to find a way out of that impasse, but it is a little bit, it is a little bit disappointing in a way. Yvonne Phillips says, sounds like he's talking himself into moving on. Okay, so he goes on to say, and this is something that I've quoted before. He says, it is not the first time that I was unable to resist that feeling of affection, that special affection and love for those women who are so damned and condemned and despised by the clergymen from the lofty heights of their pulpits. I do not damn them. I do not condemn them. I do not despise them. See here, I am nearly 30, and do you really think that I've never felt the need for love? Kivas is even older than I am. She has also known love in the past, but she's all the dearer to me for it. She's not inexperienced, but neither am I. If she wants to hold on to an old love and have nothing to do with the new, that is her affair. And if she insists on doing that and cold shoulders me, I shan't stifle my energy and my mental powers on her account. No, I refuse to do that. I love her, but I will not allow myself to become frozen and my mind crippled because of her. And the spark we need is love, and not mystical love either. That woman has not cheated me. Oh, he who takes all such women for cheats is so wrong and has so little understanding. That woman was good to me, very good, very dear, very kind. In a way, I shall not even tell my brother Theo, because I strongly suspect that my brother Theo has had a similar experience. And then he says in French, I don't know how to pronounce this, tant mieux pour lui, so much the better for him. So you know what he's talking about here. Then he says, did we spend much money? No, because I didn't have much. And I said to her, look here, you and I don't have to make ourselves drunk to feel something for each other. You had best put what I can spare in your pocket. And I wish I could have spared more, for she was worth it. And we talked about everything, about her life, about her worries, about her misery, about her health. And I had a more exhilarating conversation with her than, for instance, with my learned professorial cousin Jan. Now, I'm telling you these things not least because I hope you will realize that though I have some sentiment, I don't want to be sentimental in a silly way. Again, just look how you don't have to agree or disagree with his choices, But just look how eloquent and lucid he is in the midst of heartbreak and heartache. Then he says, that I want Quan Bin Miem all the same, to keep some warmth and vitality and my mind clear and my constitution sound in order to be able to work. And that I conceive my love for Kivos in this light, that for her sake, I don't want to get down to work feeling melancholy and will not allow myself to be thrown off course. That is something you will understand, you who have written something on the question of hygiene in your letter. You mentioned the fact that you haven't been enjoying good health lately. Make every effort you can to get better again. The clergymen call us sinners, conceived and born in sin. Bah, what confounded nonsense that is. Is it a sin to love, to feel the need for love, not to be able to live without love? I consider life without love a sinful and immoral state. So you can kind of see that his attack on the church and on religion and on the faith of his uncle and to some extent the faith of his father, to some extent is rooted in his, I guess, sexual frustration. He's seeing that through that prism, if that makes sense. Then he says, if there's anything I regret, this is still the same letter, it's a super long letter. He says, if there's anything I regret, then it is that period when I allowed mystical and theological profundities to mislead me into withdrawing too much into myself. I've gradually come to change my mind. When you wake up in the morning and find you are not alone but can see a fellow creature there in the half-light, it makes the world look so much more welcoming than the devotional journals and whitewashed church walls beloved of clergymen. She lived in a modest, simple little room, lent a quiet grey tone by the plain wallpaper, yet warm like a picture by Chardin. A wooden floor with a mat and a piece of dark red carpet, an ordinary kitchen stove, a chest of drawers, a large, perfectly simple bed. In short, a real ouvriers home. The next day she had to work at the washtub. Fair enough, I should have found her no more charming in a purple camisole jacket and a black skirt than I did now in a dress of brown or reddish grey. So I feel like a sneeze coming up. And she was no longer young, perhaps the same age as Kivos. And she had a child, yes. Life had left its mark and her youth was gone. Gone? Then he says, there are no old women. And she was strong and healthy, and yet not coarse, not common. Are those who set such great store by distinction always able to spot the distinguished? Good heavens, people search high and low for what is right under their noses, and I do too, now and then. I'm glad I did as I did because I can think of no earthly reason that would keep me from my work or cause me to lose my good humor. So there you hear him talking about how he is actually preserving his sanity, how he's actually conscious of not allowing himself to go down a certain path of being what he refers to as browbeaten. So he's able to protect, in a way, his peace of mind. Now, you may disagree with it, but I don't think you can disagree that he has learned to protect, to some extent, his peace of mind. Then he says, when I think of Kivos, then yes, I still say she and no other. Then I still think, as I did in the summer, about looking for another girl in the meanwhile. But it isn't since yesterday that I've been taking a warm interest in those women whom the clergy condemn, despise and damn. Indeed, my love for them is rather older than that for Kivos. Many times when I walk the streets all alone, with time hanging heavily on my hands, half sick and down in the dumps, with no money in my pocket, I would look at them and envy the people who would go with one. And I felt that those poor girls were my sisters in respect of circumstances and experience in life. And you see, that is an old feeling of mine and goes deep. Even as a boy, I would often look up with infinite sympathy, indeed with respect, at a woman's face past its prime, inscribed, as it were, with the words, here life and reality have left their mark. But my feeling for Kivos is quite new and something quite different. Sans le savoir, without realizing it. She is in a kind of prison. She too is poor and cannot do as she pleases. She feels a kind of resignation. And it is my belief that the Jesuitisms of clergymen and devout ladies often make a greater impression on her than on me. Jesuitisms which, precisely because I've acquired some Dessus de Descartes inside information, no longer have any hold on me now. But she's devoted to them and would be unable to bear it if the system of resignation and sin and God, and I know not what else, proved to be vain. And I don't think it ever occurs to her that God may only appear once we say those words with which Multatuli ends his prayer of an unbeliever. Oh God, there is no God. You see, for me, that God of the clergy is as dead as a doornail. But does that make me an atheist? It's quite interesting here, the depths that he's going into in this letter. He's actually asking the rhetorical question, the God of the clergy that seem to despise certain kinds of women. He says he doesn't agree with them, and he says, well, does that mean he's an atheist? It's quite a strong word, and also it's quite a turnaround to the Van Gogh from not that long ago. Then he says, clergymen consider me one, but you see, I love, and how could I feel love if I were not alive myself, or if others were not alive? And if we are alive, there's something wondrous about it. Now call that God or human nature or whatever you like. Sorry, let me read that again. Now call that God or human nature or whatever you like. But there's a certain something I cannot define systematically, although it is very much alive and real. And you see, for me, that something is God, or as good as God. You see, when in due course my time comes, one way or other, to die, well, what will keep me going even then? Won't it be the thought of love? Moral or immoral love, what do I know about it? And good heavens, I love Kivos for 1,000 reasons, but precisely because I believe in life and in something real, I'm no longer as given to abstractions as before, when I had more or less the same ideas about God and religion as Kivos seems to have now. I'm not giving her up, but that spiritual crisis with which she's perhaps struggling must be given time, and I'm prepared to be patient about it. Nothing she says or does now makes me angry, but while she cherishes and clings to the old, I must work and keep my mind clear for painting and drawing and for business. So I did what I did from a need for affection and for reasons of mental hygiene. I'm telling you this so that you won't think that I'm in a melancholy or abstracted, brooding mood. On the contrary, most of the time I'm fiddling around with and thinking about paints, making watercolors, looking for a studio, etc., etc. Old fellow, if only I could find a suitable studio. Well, my letters become rather long, but there you are. Sometimes I wish that the 3 months before I can go back to M were already over. But as it is, they may do me some good. But do write to me now and then. Is there any chance of your coming here this winter? And believe me, I shan't rent a studio, etc., without first finding out what Mauve thinks. I shall send him the floor plan as agreed, and he may come and have a look at it himself if need be. But father must stay out of it. Father is not the man to get mixed up in artistic matters. And the less I'm involved in dealings with father, the better I get on with him. I must be free and independent in very many respects. That goes without saying. I sometimes shudder when I think of Kivos and her burying herself in her past and clinging to old and dead ideas. There's something fatal about it, and it would not diminish her if she were to change her views. I think it quite possible that there will be some reaction. There's so much that is healthy and spirited in her. And so in March, I shall go back to The Hague and to Amsterdam as well. But when I left Amsterdam that time, I told myself, under no circumstances will you become melancholy or allow things to get you down, letting your work suffer just because when you've started to make some headway. Sorry, just when you have started to make some headway. Eating strawberries in the spring is indeed part of your life, but it is only one short moment in the year, and right now it is still a long way off. And so you envy me for some reason or other. Oh, my dear fellow, no need for that, since what I see can be found by everyone, perhaps even sooner by you than by me. And oh, I'm so backward and narrow-minded in many things. If only I knew exactly where the trouble lay and how to go about putting it right. But alas, we often do not see the beams in our own eye. So it's becoming quite introspective, but he's got some insight in his introspection. One thing that I think I have in common with Van Gogh, and a lot of, I think, artists do, and a lot of people who are to some extent either introverted or loners, is if the period where they are alone goes on for long enough, then they may develop quite a sophisticated kind of mental architecture. I think something that Sherlock Holmes called his thought palace or something like that. And so it becomes more and more complicated and more of a sort of a labyrinth, but also it becomes kind of culturally rich and very, very meaningful. And then as you elevate your thinking through more and more time spent alone and your thoughts going from the clouds into, I guess, the heavens, the harder it is to then have conversations with ordinary mortals, if that's the word. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way to say that you are above somebody else. I simply mean your thinking is now at a very intense place. For example, you kind of wonder, what conversations did Elon Musk have with Amber Heard? And I'm not saying she's not intelligent. I'm just saying his intelligence is in an area of electronics and whatnot, whereas her expertise is somewhere else completely. And I'm just saying, too much time on your own creates this divide where the intellectual aspect becomes supremely dominant, and then I don't know, what do you really need? Should you meet someone else that is equally intellectual, or the opposite, someone who's just sort of sunny and lighthearted or whatever? You know, should a deep person be with another deep person? Does that work? Kind of thing. Doesn't someone who's deep and intense and so on need someone who's shallower and kind of lighthearted, kind of thing? Or is that an oversimplification? And I think that is his problem, is he spent so much time alone that he's become incredibly thoughtful and intense, and now he's got the dual issue of he doesn't really have a job, he doesn't really have an income, but he's quite sophisticated in his education. And so the people who are actually matches for him socioeconomically are no match for him intellectually. Does that make sense? Or it's going to be difficult to find someone in that sense. And so unless he can elevate himself socioeconomically, and I mean, he's already 28 years old, and ultimately does fail in that. He fails to elevate himself socioeconomically, which means he fails in the game of love, I guess. He fails to secure a mate, right? Let's just have a look at some of your comments. I see the poll is now 55%, 45%. Yvonne says, I can't help but think that Vincent would be singing God's praises if Key had accepted him, though. I think you could be right. Yvonne says, I've also seen that elevation of thought in people who are extremely ill for a long time, or even near death. Yeah. Nisi says, Unfortunately, thanks a lot, Nisi. Nisi says, unfortunately, I must leave this wonderful group for the day. You are all my respite. Thank you, Nick, for your insight on Van Gogh. You really give us so much of yourself to us. Love to Timmy. I'd love to show you Timmy, but he's not sort of around right now. But he has kind of been shaved and is looking quite groomed and smart. Susan says, absence of a healthy relationship has led him down a lonely path. Yeah. Nisi says, humor can be an incredible way to stay sane. Nisi says, Theo's approval is most important in my opinion. Robbie Robbins says, did he say mental hygiene? Yes, he did. Ricardo says, Vincent, like a cactus, always full of water. Okay, Nisi, thanks for being here. See you again. Okay, so yeah, so he does mention mental hygiene. He talks about, where does he say that? He says, so I did what I did from a need for affection and for reasons of mental hygiene. So he goes on to say, write to me soon and try to separate the wheat from the chaff in my letters. If there's any good in them, some truth, but there is, of course, much in them that is more or less wrong or exaggerated perhaps without my always being aware of it. I'm anything but a man of learning, and I am so amazingly ignorant. Oh, just like so many others, and even more so than others. But I'm unable to judge that myself and can judge others even less than myself, and I'm often mistaken. But we pick up the scent as we wander about, and there is some good in every movement. Incidentally, have you heard Mauve preach? I've heard him mimicking several clergymen. Once he preached about Peter's boat. The sermon was divided into three parts. First, was he given the boat or did he inherit it? Second, did he purchase it in installments or by taking out shares? Third, had he, dreadful thought, stolen it? Then he went on to preach about the Lord's good intentions and about the Tigris and the Euphrates. And finally, he mimicked JPS marrying A and Lecomte. A's Anacob Bintus, Vincent's cousin. Not quite sure what that's about. Then he says, but when I told him that I had once said during a discussion with Father that I believe that even in church, even in the pulpit, one could say something edifying, Mauve agreed. And then he mimicked Father Bernard. God is almighty. He has made the sea. He has made the earth and the sky and the stars and the sun and the moon. He can do everything, but no, he's not almighty. There's one thing that he cannot do. What is that? What is that thing that God Almighty cannot do? God Almighty cannot cast out a sinner. Well, goodbye, Theo. Write soon, a handshake in my thoughts, and believe me, ever yours, Vincent. That's so far probably 3 or 4 times longer than the previous longest letter. So that was an epically long letter. 21st December, 1881. And now there's a fairly short letter following this, written the 22nd of December from Eton. Thanks a lot, Ricardo Ortiz, for that. Thanks a lot. Dear Theo, as father and mother are sending you a letter, I'm enclosing a word, but I hope to write to you at length soon. That is, after Mauve has been here. He is expected one of these days at Prinsenhagen, and also will also come here. You must know, Theo, that Mauve sent me a paint box with paint, brushes, palette knife, oil, turpentine, in short, everything necessary. So it is now settled that I shall begin to paint, and I am glad things have gone so far. So it's quite weird. Hey, Jealousy, thanks very much for that. So it's quite weird. Van Gogh has this tumultuous experience with Guy Voss, all of these dramas, all of these kind of interactions. And then there's this huge letter, this huge outpouring, and also him doing what he does, right? And then on the other side of that, he starts painting. I think the juxtaposition of that is really quite fascinating. That the loss of, again, you've got to imagine if things did work out with Guy Voss, would he have invested so much in his painting? Would she have wanted him to paint? Anyway, he says, well, I've been drawing a good deal recently, especially studies of the figure. If you saw them now, I'm not surprised at that. You know what he's been doing. He's now reached the point where he's actually telling Theo what he's been doing. I'm talking about rolling in the hay, so to speak. And now he's drawing the figure, and I think he's quite interested in that. In the human figure, I guess the female figure in the nude kind of thing. If you saw them now, you would see in what direction I'm going. Of course, I'm now longing to hear what Mauve will have to say. The other day I made some drawings of the children too and liked it very much. There are days of great beauty in tone and color. After I have made some progress in painting, I will succeed in expressing a little of it. But we must stick to the point. And now that I've begun drawing the figure, I will continue it until I'm more advanced. And when I work in the open air, it is to make studies of trees, viewing the trees like real figures. I mean, especially with a view to the outline, the proportion and the construction. That is the first thing one has to consider. Then comes the modeling and the color and the surroundings. And it is about these that I need Mauve's advice. But Theo, I am so very happy with my paint box. And I think by getting it now, after having drawn almost exclusively for at least a year, better than if I'd started with it immediately, I think you will agree with me in this. So he's kind of just saying, it was such a good way of doing this, drawing for a year, and then he allows himself to paint. Then he says, now in my last letter, I forgot to tell you that I think it's fine that you are going to London. I should not like you to go and stay there, but it is a good thing to become acquainted with it. In the long run, I do not think you would like it there. At least it becomes clearer and clearer to me that I never felt in my element there. Here in Holland, I feel much more at home, yes. I think I shall again become a thorough Dutchman. And don't you think that's most reasonable after all? I think I shall become quite a thorough Dutchman again in character as well as in my drawing and painting style. But I think that my having been abroad for some time and my having seen a few things there, which it is not superfluous to know, will prove useful to me. I can hear it's raining outside. When you get to London, I wish you would give my best regards to my old friends, George Reed and Richardson. I met Mr. GOGH at The Hague this summer. George Reed is, if you like, a very ordinary man in that he's not superior either in business or in knowledge. But if one knows him somewhat intimately as a man and a personality, there's none more faithful, more kind-hearted, more sensitive than he. He's so humorous and so witty and so smart in everyday things. Okay, he goes on a little bit about that. Then he says, I will do so only after you have seen him and after I've started painting. For Theo, with painting, my real career begins. Don't you think I'm right to consider it so? And now adieu, a handshake in thought, and believe me, yours sincerely, Vincent. So that's 22nd December, and the next letter is the 29th of December. Quite a long letter, maybe twice as long as the one I've just read. So this one's written from The Hague, 29 December 1881, from Vincent to Theo. Thursday evening. Dear Theo, thanks for your letter and the enclosed. I think the enclosed refers to money. I was in Eton again when I received it. As I told you, I had arranged this with Mauve, but now you see I'm back again in The Hague. On Christmas Day, I had a violent scene with Father, and it went so far that Father told me I'd better leave the house. Well, he said it so decidedly that I actually left the same day. So his previous letter was written from Eton. This one is written when he was at home with his folks. This one's written from The Hague, and he's had a violent argument with his parents and then left. He says the real reason was that I did not go to church, and also that if going to church was compulsory and if I was forced to go, I certainly should never go again out of courtesy, as I'd done rather regularly all the time I was in Eton. But in truth, there was much more at the back of it all, including the whole story of what happened this summer between Key and me. So can you see how he connects the issues of Key with the issues of God and what he describes as the clergyman? He kind of sees it as hypocrisy, and he doesn't like the way he's being tricked and manipulated and the whole thing. And maybe he's also got a bit of a guilty conscience because of what he did when he was in, not sure if it was Amsterdam or The Hague or wherever, but he seems like there's a little bit of resentment now where he's kind of like, okay, so you guys won. You wouldn't let me see Key, so I'm going to now stop going to church, right? And that's another thing that I think would be quite interesting. If his parents knew that he was going to take that route, would they have persisted in not letting him see her? Answer, probably yes. But that's nevertheless the way he's responding. So there's a little bit of kind of revenge going on here. It's not like, it's not to the extent that it's criminal. He simply just now stops going to church. It's quite interesting how he's taking in what's going on. Now, after that really long even-handed letter to his brother, you can see that he does have passion. He does get upset with his father. They do argue. Yvonne says, yes, I see it clearly. It causes a huge division in the family, and he's the outcast now. Hey, Jealousy says, my dog stays close when Nick reads. Okay, so let's go on. He says, I do not remember ever having been in such a rage in my life. That's quite a statement. I'll put that in chat just to put it out there. I do not remember ever having been in such a rage in my life. I frankly said that I thought the whole system of religion horrible. And just because I had gone too deeply into those questions during a miserable period in my life, I did not want to think of them anymore and must keep clear of them as of something fatal. Was I too angry, too violent? Maybe. But even so, it is settled now once and for all. And the words too and for too angry and too violent are probably underlined. Was I too angry, too violent? Then he says, I went back to Mauve and said, listen, Mauve, I cannot stay in Eton any longer, and I must go and live somewhere else, preferably here. Well, Mauve said, then stay. Okay, here's Timmy. Timmy's getting a bit cold because he's been shaved. So he's kind of a little bit kind of shaking and cold at night. Yeah, do you like his kind of pajamas? Look at that face. You can kind of see his eyes now. Tell me, are you okay? Shame is shivering. Hopefully you can get a little bit warm by me. Okay, so he says, and so I've rented a studio here that is a room and an alcove which can be arranged for the purpose. Cheap enough on the outskirts of town in Schenkweg, 10 minutes from Mauve. Father said if I wanted money, he would lend it to me if necessary. But this is impossible now. I must be quite independent of father. How? I do not know yet, but Mauve will help me if necessary. And I hope and believe you will too. And of course, I will work and try as hard as I can to earn something. I'm in it for now, and the die is cast. At a convenient moment, but how can it be helped? Oh, he says, at an inconvenient moment, but how can it be helped? I must have some simple furniture, and besides, all my expenses for drawing and painting materials will increase. I must also try to dress somewhat better. It is a risky affair, a question of sink or swim, but someday I should have had to set myself up. So what shall I say? It has happened sooner than I expected. As to the relation between father and me, that will not be redressed so very easily. The difference in our views and opinions is too great. It will be a hard pull for me. The tide rises high, almost to the lips, and perhaps higher still. How can I know? But I will fight my battle and sell my life dearly and try to win and get the best of it. January 1, meaning New Year's Day, I shall move into the new studio. I will take the simplest furniture, a wooden table and a few chairs. I would be satisfied with a blanket on the floor instead of a bed. But Mauve wants me to get a bed and will lend me the money if necessary. As you can imagine, I have a great many cares and worries, but still it gives me a feeling of satisfaction to have gone so far that I cannot go back again, and though the path may be difficult, I now see it clearly before me. Of course, I must ask you, Theo, if you will occasionally send me what you can spare without inconveniencing yourself. So he doesn't like leave home. He doesn't leave home with a kind of assurance from Theo that Theo's going to look after him, and kind of leaves home and then asks Theo to see what he can spare. So it's quite a brave, you could say brave or possibly impetuous. Anyway, he goes on to say, and send it to me rather than give it to others, for if possible, we must not get Mauve mixed up in the financial affairs. His helping me with advice in art matters is already of such enormous value, but he insists on my buying, for instance, a bed and a few pieces of furniture. He says I will lend you the money if necessary, and according to him, I must dress somewhat better and try not to skimp too much. So Mauve is saying, Vincent, I think you need to dress properly. I will soon write you at greater length. I will not consider it a misfortune that things have gone so far. On the contrary, notwithstanding all kinds of emotions, I feel a certain calm. There is safety in the midst of danger. What would life be if we hadn't courage to attempt anything? Thanks, Paddy. Then he says, I've been walking around everywhere to find that studio in town as well as in Scheveningen. Scheveningen is terribly expensive. This studio costs only 7 guilders a month. It's the furniture that makes it so expensive. But once one has a house of one's own, it is a good possession and gives one a more solid footing. The light comes from the south, but the window is large and high, and I think the room will look very pleasant after a while. You can imagine that I feel quite animated. How will my work be a year from now? If I could only express what I feel, exclamation mark. Well, Mauve understands all this, and he will give me as much technical advice as he can. The pictures which fill my head and my heart must be expressed in drawings or pictures. So here you see a very clear and direct transaction. It kind of starts off with this religious fervor, then it becomes love, right? And then almost in one fell swoop, he gives up on love in a way and the religious fervor. He kind of pushes that aside. And bear in mind his family, specifically his father, is a clergyman, so he kind of pushes that aside, and then he jumps into the art, right? It's a pure transaction, and in a weird way, you can imagine if the religious fervor panned out in some way, then he wouldn't have become an artist. If his love for kivos had panned out, maybe he would have become an artist, but maybe not that dedicated in terms of his art. And now he's pivoting totally towards the art. Now he's throwing everything into it. He's left home and everything is now focused on that. Then he says, Mauve himself is very busy with a large picture of a fishing smack drawn as far as the dunes by horses. I think it delightful to be in The Hague, and I find so many beautiful things here. I must try to express something of it. Adieu, boy, a handshake in thought, and write soon, believe me, yours sincerely, Vincent. Kind regards from Mauve and Jet. I have a little money left, but how long will it last? I must stay at the inn until January 1st. Address your letters, A. Mauve, Eile Boerman, 198. I go there almost every day. I actually I stayed in The Hague when I went to the Netherlands. I was there for about 6 days or so, 5 or 6 days. And I was told that Vincent van Gogh spent some time in The Hague. And so when you sort of walk through the streets and the parks and so on, you sort of wonder, did Vincent walk here? And there's a particular shop where I think not sure whether he worked there or did something there, but there's that peculiar sense of he must have seen these buildings, he must have seen, obviously, and Scheveningen is like right down the road from The Hague. And funnily enough, I didn't really know about Scheveningen. I was just like, where's the beach? And then I was told, well, it's due that way. I think, I don't know if it's north or northwest, but anyway. And one of the first things I did when I got to The Hague, I was like, where's a bike? I'm going to pedal. How far is the sea? Oh, it's 20 minutes by bike, whatever. And the first thing I did was I cycled out there, and it was such a great experience. I saw a couple of rabbits, and it was just a nice little way to get into Holland, kind of thing. Yvonne says, Vincent's ability to refocus his attentions are admirable. Yeah. Okay. So now we go from the 29th of December to the 30th of December. This is to Rappard, not a very long letter. Do you notice how the letters we've dealt with in this live stream have been quite intense? Like there's been kind of like very big things taking place. There have been big decisions that have been taking place, big emotions taking place. So I think it was quite a good idea to sequestrate these letters from, to end off the last live stream where we did. Timmy, can you do that? Okay. Okay, so this is from Vincent to Anton van Rappard. Van Rappard is kind of like a counterpart to Mauve. It's like also an artist that's sort of giving Vincent advice. So he's also reaching out to him. So he says, thanks a lot, Susan. Thanks for that. Thank you. So he says, this is written from The Hague, 30th December, 1881. Dear Rappard, I received your letter from Brussels. I do not like it at all, but no matter, for as you said yourself, you wrote it at a moment when you were somewhat abnormal. There is nothing or hardly anything in your letter that holds water. So he's being quite antagonistic, or Rappard was quite uncomplimentary towards him. Then he says, however, I'm glad you are back from Brussels. In my opinion, you do not belong there. And for the technical proficiency you hope to acquire at the academy, I am much afraid your hopes will be deceived. Not even fellows like Stallard can teach one. Now I'm busy with all kinds of work, for I've rented a small studio that I shall move into by January 1. So I have to arrange a lot of things. When I've quieted down a bit later on, I shall write you again about all sorts of things in a calmer vein, but don't take it ill of me if at present I've more serious things to do than write letters. Of course, my letters don't pretend to be invariably right, always to explain things correctly. Oh no, I'm often mistaken. But when I tell you, Rappard, that those academic fellows you are making so much of aren't worth a cent, and when I say this, I mean Stallard and Severdonk. I am in dead earnest, and I tell you, if I were you, I'd let them go. So he's kind of just dismissed his father. He's decided to let go of Key. He's almost describing himself as an atheist, and now he's kind of also ridiculing other, I guess, art professors. So he's kind of really cutting loose in a way. Then he says, but I've already told you so several times and won't repeat it. I won't hear another syllable about the whole academy, nor will I say another syllable about it. It really isn't worth the trouble. Herewith I send you my greetings. What kind of fellows are those artists with whom you drank a glass of lambic? Why don't you mention the names of some of them? Are they fellows who might be important to you? I hope so, but I doubt it very much. Goodbye, old fellow. I've no more time to spare, nor do I feel inclined to write a longer letter. When you are back in your studio, be sure to work regularly with models. It will give you more satisfaction in the long run. Well, cheerio, Vincent. Then this postscript. In case you want to write me again, you can send your letters to Etten. They will send them on to me. I'm wavering between 2 or 3 studios, and before January 1st, I shall decide which one to take. But for the moment, I've no fixed address. You will get it later on. I left Etten because I had too much botheration with my father, quite an interesting word, about all kinds of things that really are not worthwhile talking about going to church and such things, which even though I was working hard and much, got me into a mood of boredom and chilliness. That was all wrong. Therefore, I've settled down here, and I'm glad I'm in different surroundings. Of course, now I've rather a lot of financial worries, but after all, it is better than those everlasting bickerings and squabbles. When he refers to lambic, that's apparently a very strong, twice fermented, sour tasting beer, a speciality of Flanders. So this is quite a testy letter from Van Gogh to Rappard. It's not particularly friendly. In fact, it's one of the unfriendliest letters I think I've seen from him, where it is kind of quite nasty. Then now we're at the 1st of January from The Hague, and I just want to see how many letters are in January before I continue. We're now in January 1882. Okay, so he writes, "Dear brother, I just send you my best wishes for the new year. May it be a good year for you in every respect, and egotistically I add, for me too." A little bit of humor there. Well, as for me, it will perhaps please you to hear that I'm installed in a studio of my own, a room with an alcove. The light is bright enough, for the window is large, twice as large as an ordinary window, but it faces the south. The furniture I have is in the real village policeman style, as you call it, but I think mine is more so than yours, although you invented the word. I have, for instance, real kitchen chairs and a real strong kitchen table. Mauve has sent me 100 guilders for rent and furniture and to have the window and light adjusted. You can imagine that this is a load on my mind, but, well, it was the only possible way, because in the long run, it's much cheaper to have things of your own than always to spend money for a so-called furnished room. Well, I had a lot of trouble getting everything, and before I could arrange the furniture so as to make it do. But now, boy, I have a real studio of my own, and I am so glad. I did not dare hope that it would happen so soon, but now I am very glad, and I hope you will also approve of it. Listen, you know that my expenses will be greater than in Eton, but I shall try to struggle along. Mauve gives me great hope that I shall soon begin to earn something. And now I'm in a studio of my own. This will not make an unfavorable impression on the persons who until now suspected me of amateurism, of idleness, of sponging on others. I hope you will be able to send me something these days. If I were greatly in need and asked Mauve, he would not refuse me, but I really think he has already done enough. It happens that once in his life, every man is to set up housekeeping. And though at first I greatly dreaded the feeling of being in debt, I feel after all, it is better so. I think something that is not often mentioned in terms of Van Gogh is from this point onwards, in a way. He does actually move back to his parents, but the fact is, for the next 8 years about, and you could argue that it's been going on for even longer, but basically for the next 8 years, he is going to be relying on the charity of his brother and of other people. And I think that is something that is, I think, the untold story in a way of Van Gogh, is that he, whatever his faults, whatever his failings, he manages to inspire and, how can I put it, he manages to convince those close to him to support him. And that's no mean feat. It's no mean feat to convince someone to give you money for 8 years with virtually nothing to show for it. Not everybody would do that. And so the fact that he does that shows that he's got some skill as a writer and as a person, as a brother even. So you might say that he lacks experience with perhaps the opposite sex, or that he has certain limits in terms of his ability to have social intercourse with people, but he also has the ability to convince other people to trust him and invest in him, not only his brother, but also Mauve. Also, I'm not sure if Rappard as well, but there'll be other people as well that'll also take some interest in him and invest in him to some extent. Then he says, and I think a lot of this comes from his letter writing. Obviously, you know, when you're writing letters for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you become very good at saying what needs to be said effectively, right? While Stephanie is here and Sharon is left, Sharon says, Cheerio, my UK grandfather's favorite saying. Oh, Sharon is still here. Okay, so Timmy, can you sit still? So then he says, we arranged that I shall work regularly from the model. It is the most expensive and yet the cheapest way in the end. A little bit of a contradiction there. It's the most expensive and yet the cheapest way in the end. De Bock does not improve on further acquaintance. He rather lacks backbone. I think he's talking about a book by De Bock. And maybe not. Then he says, and he gets angry when one says some things which are only the ABC. He has some feeling for landscape. He knows how to put some charm into it. Timmy, do you want to? Timmy says bye-bye. Okay. He has some feeling for landscape. He knows how to put some charm into it. For instance, in a large picture which he's making now, but one gets no hold on him. It is too vague and insubstantial. His pictures are the shadow of an impression, and in my opinion, that impression is hardly worth repeating so often. I do not wish to associate much with other painters. Each day I find Mauve cleverer and more trustworthy, and what more can I want? However, Theo, I shall have to dress a little better now. I know now the direction in which I have to go and need not hide myself. So I shall not avoid meeting other people. Neither shall I seek them. Mauve and Jet send you their compliments. I think that's quite interesting where he says, I know now the direction in which I have to go and need not hide myself. So I shall not avoid meeting other people. But then he says, neither shall I seek them. And I kind of get the feeling that he is kind of saying, F you to everybody. He's saying, I'm going to paint now, and certain family members, certain other people, F you, and I'm going to concentrate on painting. I'm not going to seek you out. I'm turning my back on you. And that's what you get for turning your back on me, kind of thing. Stephanie says, so he's willing to step outside of his comfort zone. Okay, so he goes on to say, okay, so that's the end of that letter. Yours sincerely, Vincent. I think I'm only going to go through letters until the 2-hour mark, so for about 15 more minutes. Timmy, what's up? Can you go and lie down on my bed? I don't know if he wants me to take him outside, but you're going to have to hold tight, Timmy. Okay, letter from Vincent to Theo from The Hague, 5th of January, 1882. Dear brother, listen, Theo, what's the matter with you? Didn't you receive my last letter in which I told you what happened at home and how in consequence I left the house and went back to The Hague and am now settled in my own studio, address Schenkweg number 138 near Rainspoor Station. That's quite a unfriendly way of addressing his brother. In fact, I don't know if I've seen him less friendly. So it seems like he's quite flustered and angry. He says, I know Mauve helped me to get settled, but I still have a great many expenses. And for the last few days, I really have not had a penny in my pocket. Of course, I'd counted positively on your sending me at least 100 francs for the month of January. So now he is kind of being a burden on his brother. He's kind of expecting his brother to help him, is feeling entitled to help. He says, but up to now, I've not received anything, not even a letter from you. The worst is that I cannot work with a model until I have some money in my pocket again. So I can hardly do anything as the weather is too bad to sit outside, though I tried it several times. I'm all right, but the last few days I've been faint with suspense. I've been looking for models and found a few, but I cannot take them. In desperation, I went today to Goupil's, for according to what you wrote me, I thought as a last resort, I would ask Tierstig to lend me something. But Tierstig had just gone out of town for a few days. I must put a good face on the matter when I'm with Mauve. Mauve has really done enough. Tierstig had promised to come see me, but he has not been here yet. If for some reason or other you cannot send the 100 francs at once, send me at least part of it by return mail. I found a stamp in my pocket just now. Otherwise, I should not be able to send you this letter. It is a time of struggle for you and for me, but I think we are making progress. So let us keep courage. Adieu with a handshake. Yours sincerely, Vincent. So quite a stern and kind of desperate letter from Vincent. So that's 5th or 6th of January. And so the next letter is 5th or the 8th of January. And this is a letter from Theo Okay, so I think it's a letter from Theo to Vincent, and then another letter from Vincent to Theo. Quite a short letter. So this is on a Goupil and Key letterhead. It's a letter from Theo to Vincent. Please don't think I'm sending your letter back to offend you. I simply believe this is the quickest way of answering it clearly. And if you didn't have your own letter to hand, you might not be able to understand quite so well what my answer refers to. Now the numbers will guide you. I'm short of time. I'm still expecting a model today. Then that's what Vincent's saying. So Vincent says, please don't think I'm sending your letter back to offend you. I simply believe this is the quickest way of answering it clearly. So it's kind of like that thing where when you get an email from someone, you email them back, but you kind of copy their email and then you kind of provide your answers next to it, right? In maybe red ink or whatever. So that's how he starts the letter. Then the next part is actually Theo's handwriting, and he writes the following. Theo writes, Paris, 5th January 1882. My dear Vincent, I've received your 2 letters and thank you for keeping me in the picture. So if you're wanting to know how Theo responds to Vincent, even when he's upset, how Theo is different to Vincent, how he writes, well, you're getting a sense of that. So he says, thank you for keeping me in the picture. I think it is a very good thing that you've settled permanently in The Hague and hope to do as much as I can to help you out until you can start earning your own money. But what I do not approve of is the way in which you contrive to leave father and mother. So there's a 1 next to that, and Vincent's response to that is quite interesting here. He says, I did not contrive, with inverted commas, anything. On the contrary, when father was here, Mo, father and I talked about my renting a studio in Etten, spending the winter there and returning to The Hague in the spring. Because of the models and because I had settled down to my work in Etten and had begun to make headway. That does not alter the fact that I should have liked to prolong my stay in The Hague a bit more, seeing that I was here already, but it was nevertheless my definite intent. This is obviously Vincent speaking now, or writing. He says, it was my definite intention to continue my studies of the Brabant peasant types, and when my plans were thwarted, after they had been discussed with Mauve, and I had already entered into correspondence with him about the studio in question, a shed in need of some repair, I could no longer contain my anger. Do you recall a letter I wrote to you in which I expanded at some length on my plan to continue with those studies? I mean the letter in which I asked you to impress upon father and mother once more in plain terms that working in Etten was of the greatest importance to me. I remember the way I put it. It would be bad if, because of a whim of father's, I to abandon work that had begun to make headway and on which I'd been engaged for months. Give it some thought yourself. Despite Mauve's help, I am in much more of a fix here than at home, and I'll be blowed if I know how I'm going to get through it. So I think you'll agree with me that this so far is the most fraught we've seen the relationship between Vincent and Theo ever since they were sort of estranged while he was in the Borinage. But I mean, this is even a harsher letter than those letters, right? Theo's not very impressed with the way that he thinks that Vincent manipulated the situation to get kind of what he wanted. So, maybe he felt that he wanted to go to The Hague anyway. And so he had an argument about his dad about not going to church. And Theo seems to think that wasn't necessary, and now it's up to him to pay for it, literally. It's up to Theo must now pay for Vincent's rash action, right? So, yeah, if you want to follow the letter, so you'll notice I'm dealing with it step by step. So that was point number 1. Then we go to this is now Theo again writing. He says, that you could not bear it there is possible. These are Theo's words. That you could not bear it there, meaning in Eton, is possible, and that you should differ in your views from people who have lived in the country all their lives and who have no chance of participating in modern life is only too natural. But what the devil made you so childish and so shameless as to embitter father and father's life and render it almost impossible by setting about things in the way you did? It isn't hard to fight with someone who is already weary. So there are two points here that Vincent wants to respond to, but basically the key point here, he says, what the devil made you so childish and so shameless as to embitter father and father's life. It's quite strong words from Theo. Thanks, Stephanie. Good to hear. So Vincent's response to that is the reproach that I said about embittering father. So the reproach meaning your accusation or your criticism that I said about embittering father's and mother's life is not really your own. I know it and of old as one of father's Jesuitisms, and have told father and mother too that I consider it to be a Jesuitism and that I didn't take the slightest notice of it. Whenever one says something to father to which he has no reply, he comes out with a reproach of that sort and says, for example, you will be the death of me, while he sits there perfectly calmly reading his newspaper and smoking his pipe. So I take such reproaches for what they are. Or else father flies into an enormous rage, is used to people being frightened by it, and is astonished when somebody does not give way before his anger. Father is extremely touchy and irritable and obstinate in domestic affairs and is used to having his way. And the heading, the rules and regulations of this house, with which I am obliged to comply, includes literally anything that comes into father's head. Then number 3 says, it's easy enough to fight with an old man because father is an old man. I've spared his feelings 100 times and tolerated things that are little short of intolerable. Anyway, there wasn't any fighting this time either, but just an enough. And because he wouldn't listen to reason and common sense, I spoke straight out, and it can only be to the good that for once father should have heard a few home truths expressed that others too think now and then. Now, what I want you to think about here is Vincent is pretty upset, uptight, adamant, indignant, angry, and all the rest. Bear in mind, it wasn't that long ago that he wrote that really, really long revelatory letter to Theo. And now things have changed, and now he expects help from Theo. And Theo's also like, you didn't ask me about this, although he doesn't say that in so many words, but he's not, you remember, he's also his father's son. And he's like, I didn't really like the way you dealt with our father, kind of thing. And Vincent's kind of fighting back. He's saying, he said, there wasn't any fighting this time, but just an enough. And because he wouldn't listen to reason and common sense, I spoke straight out, and it can only be to the good that for once father should have heard a few home truths expressed that others think too now and then. So Vincent's not backing down. So now to go back to Theo's letter, he writes, these are Theo's words. He writes, when father wrote to me about it, so Theo's father, Vincent's father, has written to Theo to say what he thought about everything. He says, I thought it must be a misunderstanding, but you yourself say in your letter, as far as the relationship between father and me is concerned, it will not be remedied in a hurry. So now we go to point number 4. So he says that it will not be remedied in a hurry. For the sake of appearances, I put matters straight by writing to father again and telling him that I've rented a studio, that I wished him a happy new year, and that I hoped we would have no more quarrels of this or any other kind in that new year. I shall do no more about it, nor do I need to. If this last row had been an isolated case, then it would be a different matter, but it was preceded by other rows. Yet whenever I told father a few things in a calmer, though still resolute way, his honour would fling it all systematically to the winds. So as far as the things I've said in anger are concerned, I think the same even in a calmer mood, though for diplomatic reasons I've usually kept quiet about them or put them differently. But this time I lost my temper. My diplomacy went by the board, and well, for once I had my say. I offer no apology for that, and while father and mother continue in this mood, I shall take nothing back. Should they later behave in a more humane, more sensitive, and more sincere way, then I shall be happy to take everything back, but I doubt if that will happen. So he's really standing up for himself. The other thing to bear in mind here is this is Vincent at the most raw and emotional that I think I've seen him, and yet he's still, although he's expressing sentiments that aren't particularly nice, that aren't particularly edifying, he still does it in quite a cultured way, certainly more polite than I think a lot of people when they upset. Okay, so then he goes on, if we go back to Theo's letter, Theo writes, don't you know him then, and don't you realize that father cannot live while there's all this bickering between the two of you? So I'm going to put that in chat. So just to put things in perspective, jumping a bit forward in time, their father would actually die about 3 years later. So his father would literally die 3 years later. So it's not like an idle thing that is being said here. And, Vincent saying, or him saying to Vincent, you'll be the death of me, might seem like an exaggeration, but he is getting a lot of stress from Vincent that he doesn't know how to deal with. Then the next thing Theo says, so hang on, let me go to point number 4. So Theo says, don't you know then, and don't you realize that father cannot live while there's all this bickering between the two of you? Vincent responds, I think I've already dealt with that response. Oh, sorry, response to number 5. He says that father and mother cannot live while there's all this bickering going on, etc. That's true insofar as they are creating a desert around themselves and are earning themselves an unhappy old age when they could have had a happy and contented one. But as to such expressions as, I cannot bear it, it's killing me, my life is embittered, I no longer attach any importance to them, for that's only their little way. And if they do not change, then, as I've already said, I'm afraid they are storing up many bad and lonely days for themselves. I think a lot of this is coming from the sort of digging in their heels, the intractable attitude to him not seeing Kivos. I think it's a kind of a revenge for that. Because I think he felt like, I cannot bear it. It's killing me. My life is embittered. I think he felt that as well. Okay, so now we go back to Theo. Theo writes, in French, at all costs, you are duty-bound to ensure that matters are put right. And I guarantee that one day you will be extremely sorry for having been so callous in this matter. And this, he starts off writing in French, meaning at all costs. And then he says, you are duty-bound, and that is italicized. He's saying you will put matters right. So it's quite stern from his younger brother. Stephanie says, yes, he doesn't have a sailor's mouth. Robin, well put, says, like two stags locking horns, fighting for dominance. Well, I think it's kind of fighting for the one is fighting for the respect of his parents, and the other one is fighting for a kind of liberation, that he be respected as a separate individual. And it's almost like Vincent saying, respect me as I'm not my father's son, I'm a man on in my own terms, kind of thing. Okay, so now we go on, not a very long letter from Theo. He says, it is Mauve who attracts you at the moment, and carried away as usual, you find anyone who is not like him objectionable, because you look for the same qualities in everybody. Vincent's response to that is, as for Mauve, yes, indeed, I'm very fond of Mauve and am in sympathy with him. I love his work and I count myself fortunate to be learning from him, but I can no more withdraw into some system or school than Mauve can himself. And apart from Mauve and Mauve's work, I also love others who are quite different and work quite differently. And as for myself and my own work, perhaps there is similarity between us at times. But there's certainly a difference as well. If I love someone or something, then I do so in earnest and sometimes with real passion and fire. But that doesn't make me think as a matter of course that only a few people are perfect and all the others worthless. Far from it. Really is quite an intense letter. Ricardo says, Theo should have known better than to serve Vincent a bitter pill. Yvonne says, a certain line has been drawn now. Okay, so Ricardo says, things work themselves out, and Theo is pushing Vincent, the last person that needs a leash. So then, going back to Theo's letter, there's not much left to it, but he says, it is not a bitter pill for father to swallow, to see himself belittled by someone who claims to be more of a free thinker, and whom, au fond, meaning deep down, he possibly envies from time to time for his clearer insights. Does his life count for nothing then? I don't understand you. Write to me again when you can, and give my regards to Mauve and Jet. Ever yours, Theo. So I'm just going to read that again because Vincent responds to points 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 just from that last little bit. He says, it is not a bitter pill for father to swallow, to see himself belittled by someone who claims to be more of a free thinker and whom, au fond, deep down, he possibly envies from time to time for his clearer insights. Is it not a bitter pill for father to swallow, to see himself belittled by someone who claims to be more of a free thinker? Does his life count for nothing then? So Theo's asking Vincent, does our father's life count for nothing? I don't understand you. Write me again when you can and give my regards to Jet. So I'll just put that in chat because I'm going to be responding using Vincent's response with those numbers. Oh, it's not going to go through. That's half of it. There's the other half. Okay. So Vincent's response to this is, let's go to number 8. He says, free thinker, that is really a word I detest, although I have to use it occasionally, faute de mieux, for want of anything better. The fact is that I do my best to think things through and try in my actions to take account of reason and common sense. So you actually get a bit of a backhanded compliment here from Theo, where he says, possibly he envies you for your clearer insights and for being a bit more of a free thinker than what he is. He's saying maybe Dad actually envies you in terms of that. Anyway, then he says, the fact is that I do my best to think things through and try in my actions to take account of reason and common sense. Now, I think that is again addressing Vincent as the mad artist. He is someone, even when he's emotional, even when he's angry, good night, Sky, take care. It's, I think, quite late in the UK. But anyway, he says, the fact that I do my best to think things through and try in my actions to take account of reason and common sense, that is someone who is a critical thinker, who is quite lucid even when he's emotional, who is quite rational even when he's upset, right? Then he says, and trying to belittle someone would be quite contrary to that. So it is perfectly true that on occasion I've said to Father, do try to think this or that through, or to my mind, this or that does not stand up. But that is not trying to belittle someone. I'm not Father's enemy if I tell him the truth for a change. Not even that time I lost my temper and did so in salty language. Only did no good, and Father took it amiss. In case Father refers to my saying that ever since I've acquired so much Jesus les cartes, I don't know what that is. Let's find out what that is. Jesus les cartes. What is that? Translation. It means below the cards. Ever since I've acquired so much below the cards, I haven't given two pins for the morality and the religious system of the clergy and their academic ideas, then I absolutely refuse to take that back, for I truly mean it. It is just that when I am in a calm mood, I don't talk about it, although it is a different matter when they try to force me to go to church, for instance, or to attach importance to doing so, for then I naturally tell them that it is completely out of the question. So you can see he's not backing down. Then he says, this is point number 10, does Father's life count for nothing? Then he says, I've already said that when I hear someone say, you will be the death of me, while in the meantime that man is reading his paper and half a minute later is talking about goodness knows what advertisement or other, I consider that phrase fairly irrelevant and superfluous and take no notice of it. As soon as that kind of phrase is repeated to others, who are then going to consider me more or less a murderer or even a parasite, so someone who kills his parents, I say these slanders are nothing more or less than Jesuitisms. There you are. Anyway, the murderer has left the house now, and so, in short, I take not the slightest notice of any of it, and even consider it ridiculous. You say, I don't understand you. This is point number 11. Well, I readily believe that, for writing is really a wretched way of explaining things to each other. So, you can't leave a voice message, you can't phone him up. And so you can imagine that he is feeling frustrated. He's got to post a reply. He says, writing is really a wretched way of explaining things to each other, and it takes up a great deal of time, and you and I have a great deal to do as it is. But we must have a little patience with each other until we can see and speak to each other. And then the 12th point is where Theo says, write to me again. Then he says, yes, of course, but first we must agree how. Would you like me to write in a kind of business-like style, dry and formal, weighing my words carefully and actually saying nothing at all? Or would you like me to continue to write as I've done recently, telling you all the thoughts that come into my head without being afraid of rambling on now and then, without censoring my thoughts or holding them back? That's what I would prefer. That is, being free to write or say exactly what I mean. Do you see how expressive he is? Do you see how plainly he speaks? Now, I wonder how Theo will respond to that. Sharon says, such lovely letter writers, those Van Goghs. I feel like I know them. Yvonne says, the murderer has left the house now. LOL. Vincent is on fire. So, he's not being pushed around here. He is standing up for himself. and not in a nasty way, he's kind of trying to be quite reasonable. He says, so much for my direct answer to your letter, but I still have some things to say to you about drawing, etc., etc. I would sooner talk about that. Consider it a point in my favor that for the time being, I'm behaving as if father and mother did not exist. It would have been much better if I had spent this winter in Eton, and things would have been much easier for me too, especially for financial reasons, if I were to start thinking and fretting about that once again. It would make me melancholy, so that's over and done with, once and for all. I think the way they use the word melancholy, we would use the word depressed in our parlance, right? In our contemporary vernacular, to use big words. Anyway, then he says, so that's over and done with, once and for all. I'm here now and I must try to muddle through. If I wrote to father about it again, it would be adding fuel, should be to the fire. I don't ever want to get angry again, and I'm throwing myself with might and main into life and affairs here. And what I can do, Eton is lost and so is Hiker, but I shall try to obtain something else in their stead. And then this seems to be sort of a postscript. Well, this is quite a long letter. This seems to be a sort of a postscript to me. He says, let me now thank you warmly for what you sent me. I don't need to add that I'm still extremely anxious in spite of it. Of course, my expenses are greater than in Eton, and I cannot get down to work half as energetically as I should like, and should be able to if I had greater resources. But my studio is turning out well. I wish you could see it sometime. I've hung up all my studies, and you must send me back those you still have, because they could still benefit me. They may not be saleable, and I readily acknowledge all their faults, but there's something of nature in them because they were done with some passion. And you know, I'm toiling away at watercolors right now, and when I've got my hand in, they will be saleable. But Theo, believe me, when I went to Mo for the first time with my pen drawings and said M said, now try it with charcoal and crayon and stump. I had the devil of a job working with that new material. I was patient, but that didn't seem to help. And then I grew so impatient at times that I would stamp on my charcoal and become utterly dejected. It sounds like he's literally stomping, jumping up and down on his charcoal. What else does it mean to say, I grew so impatient at times I would stamp on my charcoal? And yet, a little while later, I sent you drawings done with chalk and charcoal and the brush. And I went back to Mauve with a whole lot of similar ones, in which naturally he found something to criticize, and with reason, and you did as well. It was a step forward. Now I'm once again passing through a similar period of struggle and dejection, of patience and impatience, of hope and despair. But I have to struggle on, and well, in good time I shall understand watercolors better. If it were easy, there would be no pleasure in it. And ditto with painting. Added to this, the weather is inclement, meaning rainy or unsettled, and so that I have yet to go out just for the fun of it this winter. Still, I am enjoying life, and in particular, having a studio on my own is too glorious for words. When are you coming to have some tea or coffee with me? Soon, I hope. You can spend the night too, if necessary. How very nice and how enjoyable. And I even have some flowers too, a few small bowls of bulbs. And what's more, I've obtained yet another ornament for my studio. I got an amazing bargain of splendid woodcuts from the graphic, in part printed, not from the cliches, but from the blocks themselves. Just what I've been looking for years, drawings by Herkomer, Frank, Hull, Walker, and others. I bought them from Block, the Jewish bookseller, and for 5 guilders, picked the best from an enormous pile of graphics and London news. They include some superb things, for instance, The Houseless and Homeless by Fielders, poor people waiting outside a night shelter, and 2 large Herkomers and many small ones. Just skipping a little bit down, then he says, anyway, it's just the stuff I need. Then he says, and I keep such beautiful things at home with some contentment because, my dear fellow, although I'm still a long way from doing anything as beautiful myself, I've nevertheless hung a few of my old studies of old peasants, etc., on the wall, which proves that my enthusiasm for those artists is not mere vanity, but that I struggle and strive to make something myself that is realistic and yet done with feeling. I've got about 12 figures of diggers and people working in the potato field, and I wonder if I couldn't do something with them. You still have a few of them, for instance, a man putting potatoes into a sack. Well, I'm not sure when, but sooner or later I must get down to that, because last summer I made some careful observations, and here in the dunes I should be able to do a good study of the earth and the sky and then put in the figures boldly. Still, I'm not setting too much store by these studies and hope, of course, to do something quite different and better. But the Brabant types are characteristic, and who knows whether they can't still be used to good account. If there are any of you, if there are any you would like to keep, feel at liberty to do so, but I should be very glad to have back those in which you are not interested. By studying new models, I will automatically discover the mistakes in proportion I made in last summer's studies, and so they may yet prove useful to me. It's kind of going to be interesting where Vincent kind of starts saying, is my art selling? You know, kind of when he starts to realize, why is my art not selling? He's not really at that point yet. He's kind of thinking, I still need to improve as an artist. But surely he reaches a point where he feels like, I've arrived, my work's good enough, but why isn't it selling? It's going to be interesting to feel or to note at what point is he at that point. He's already starting to talk in early 1882 about, is my work saleable? You know, whether it's saleable or not, or it might soon be saleable. And of course, it wouldn't really ever be during his lifetime. Besides the Red Harvest, which is a stunning painting. Anyway, he goes on to say, when your letter took so long to come, since it went to Mo first, I received it even later. I had to go to Mr. Tierstig and he gave me 25 guilders until I received your letter. It might be a good idea if I, with your knowledge, or you with my knowledge, made some sort of arrangement with Mr. T. For you realize, Theo, I must know with as much certainty as possible what to expect. I must be able to calculate and be able to tell in advance whether I can do this or that or must give it up. So you will do me a great favor by agreeing with me to a definite arrangement, and I hope you'll write to me about it soon. So this is what I mean by, this is in the middle of a heated argument and a big fight, a big row with his parents. Vincent's nevertheless able to sort of be charming, to stand up for himself, but also come across as legitimate in his demands, I guess. And whether you agree with that or not, the point is that Theo relents and his father will relent, kind of thing. Then his last paragraph is, he says, Movis promised me to put my name forward immediately as an associate member of Pulcri. That's the Artist Society and headquarters of the Hague School, because I shall then be able to draw from the model there 2 evenings a week and shall have more contact with artists. Then, as soon as possible after that, I shall become a full member. Well, my dear fellow, thanks for what you sent, and believe me, with a handshake, ever yours, Vincent. Well, I've gone on a bit further than 2 hours. I just want to see how many more letters there are in January. There's 12th to the 6th of January and the 21st of January, 22nd of January, 26th of January, and then that's it. So I think I'm going to stop there. This is a picture that he includes with homeless. It's called Homeless and Hungry, but it includes, or he references in his letter to Theo. And I mean, it's titled Homeless and Hungry. I don't know whether that's supposed to be a hint. Hey, Jealousy says, Van Gogh described fellow patients whom he called my companions in misfortune, slumped into silent resignation with no treatment and nothing to fill their days except the next stodgy meal. Stephanie says, I love how he's determined to use his mistakes to improve his craft. Mistakes are lessons, exclamation. Absolutely. In art, if you can be humble about your mistakes, if you can be honest about your mistakes, then you're going to improve. If you are in denial as an artist, then you are going to struggle. Okay, so I just want to see how long the next letter is. Okay, it's a little bit long. But so we'll get to this letter next. I just want to show you some of the sketches that he does, that he's doing. It's quite amazing when you look at the sketch and the handwriting around it, and you see Vincent's name there. It's quite amazing. You realize that this is real. This is not fiction. It's not hypothetical. And then he also does this sketch. So this is the kind of thing when he talks about drawing a model or whatever, this is the kind of thing that he's doing. And you can see his technique has definitely improved. Ricardo says, letters seem like journal entries. Seems like Theo lucked out in receiving them. Not sure Vincent learned too much or changed his lifestyle from Theo. Yvonne says, oh, I actually love that sketch. It's nice, eh? There's another one here. I don't know if it's going to come up. No. Not quite sure why these links are broken. And then there's this one here as well. It's just a combination of the writing and the sketch in the letter that gives you kind of a graphic sense that Van Gogh's not just some nobody. You know, he's already on his way to becoming, you know. Okay, so I'm going to be on for another 2 minutes. Let's make it 2 hours 30. He talks about you will deeply regret it someday. My dear boy, I think I've done much of that regretting before this. Okay, well, Timmy's really shivering. I think I'm going to have to put a blanket over him or something. I can actually hear it raining outside. So something I meant to mention in yesterday's live with Paul was that yesterday was the 21st, the solstice, the summer solstice if you're in the northern hemisphere. But basically, we've just gone past the longest day in the northern hemisphere and the shortest day in the southern hemisphere. And so obviously from this point onwards, the sun is now going to be moving towards us in the southern hemisphere and away from you guys. So it's kind of the beginning of the end of your summer and the beginning of the end of our winter. Although I do believe that the warmest days in summer in the northern hemisphere are a little bit subsequent to the solstice, and the coldest days in winter are a little bit delayed. They tend to happen after the solstice as well. It's usually like in the first week of July. So yeah, it's just quite interesting that we've just gone past the day where that you get that change taking place. Kind of quite interesting. Yvonne Phillips says the homeless one is amazing. I don't think he painted the homeless one though. I don't think that's his work. That's by another artist. But it certainly is a powerful sketch anyway. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to take it further than that. I just want to thank those who are here. Stephanie, I'm glad you made it. Stephanie says, dinner is ready. Glad I got to be here with you for a couple of letters. I'll be watching what I missed. Have a great dinner, Stephanie. Glad you could make it. And I think we're leaving one another at the same time. Are there any other mods in? I think it's Sharon's still here. I know that Sky left a few moments ago. I'm not sure if Jean's still here. Well, Stephanie says it's raining here as well. Then also to the mods, not the mods, the members, some really interesting comments in chat from some of you, Yvonne Phillips, Robbie, Paddy, Hey Jealousy, Ricardo. Yeah. What's really amazing is in terms of the voting, was Vincent van Gogh wrong to pursue Key? It's exactly 50-50 right now. Exactly half of you voted yes and half of you voted no. And I think that's a very appropriate score, because I think the answer is yes and no. Okay, Timmy, I'm going to put you down. Okay, so that is it. I did want to quote from this book and refer to these figures, but to be clear, this only really comes from like 1883, so I don't really want to jump too far forward in time. So again, I just want to thank you guys for being here. I guess I'll see you guys again on Sunday. And don't forget, I'm going to be doing a Culture's Wrath tomorrow, and if nothing else comes up, I'll probably be doing Danielle, is it Redlin? Is that her name? Danielle, she's got kind of a Redlick, Danielle Redlick. We're going to look at that case in a way, looking at it on its own terms, but also juxtaposing it with Amber Heard. And I think there's some very interesting comparisons to draw there. So look out for that later in this week. Yvonne says, thanks very much. Stephanie, you must go and have dinner. Take care, guys. Robbie Robbins says, looking forward to Sunday and tomorrow. Okay, cool. Margaret Zabinski, take care. Okay, guys, I'll see you guys next time. All the best. Enjoy your dinner, Stephanie. Okay, ciao.